If you're ever confused when you're drawing these super complicated hair layers, don't worry, same. Which is why I spent hours studying Ccroquette and YeeJ Chan, and in this video I'll be breaking down all the hidden techniques to draw these juicy looking hair in 3 easy steps. Let's go! 2 key points to remember here. At this stage we want to capture the overall shape and the silhouette of the hair and think about how it frames the face. How Ccroquette does this is simplifying the hair down to almost only the silhouette. We get some idea here about how the hair is layered, but for the sake of the video we're going to ignore that for now. YeeJ Chan, the second artist I'll be studying today, actually has a YouTube channel, which is very helpful because from the clips I watched, she almost always starts with defining the layering and the shapes of the front portion of the hair. If you didn't know already, we can actually divide the hair into 3 main groups: the front, sides, and back. Each part contributes to the silhouette and overall shape of the head in their own way, but here what you want to focus on is how the hair frames the face, like in these examples on screen. This is, however, touching more on character design, which is not the main point of the video, so if you want me to do a breakdown on that topic, leave a comment down below, but let's focus on the hair. These outlines you see is most likely fake. Whoa, okay, serious allegations here, but what do I mean by that? I don't know for sure, but because Ccroquette's style is more painterly, or as the Japanese say, atsunuri, it makes sense to me that the lines will be added after the rendering phase, or at least when the shapes are more or less finalized. Keep in mind that this is just speculation based on what I observe. I don't have any real information as to how Ccroquette actually draws, but if you're someone that struggles with finding good shapes for the hair, this might be a better technique because you can sort of carve out the shape you're looking for and then you add lines at the end to make it look like you did them in the first place. Another thing about Ccroquette and YeeJ Chan's lines, they're also very much representing the shadows of the hair. If you look closely at the final, you'll see that the lines are generally thicker around where the shadows are and also when it's an intersection of multiple lines. This requires some level of planning, you know, you have to know where lights will be placed, but if you're using the fake lines method, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Another really common technique is you could also draw with a brush that has no line weight as first. Just focus on getting the shapes down, and then when you figure out your lighting with a really rough color pass like this, you go back and redraw your lines on another layer. But yeah, as for the shapes themselves, you want to make these banana shapes. Actually, they look more like dumplings. Yeah, this just looks like gyoza, right? Anyways, the general advice is to think of hair groups as flat ribbons when they twirl and turn like this. And then for bangs, you want to cut up the silhouette by using the big, medium, small technique to give it a more interesting shape language. With references like these, you can pay attention to how the hair flows, especially around the ends. With just the silhouette alone, the general shape I captured looks like this. Then to emphasize the twirl on these strands, I pay attention to how dark and light some of these parts of the hair look. Basically, the darker they are, the more overlap there is, so it gives you some sort of clue as to how you would draw them. It's important to know these common shape languages of the hair because now we're going to apply these onto the head in a more structured way. But speaking of structure, one thing you need to know is how to draw heads properly, and that's where today's sponsor Skillshare comes in. This class, Drawing Heads, Draw Heads Fast at Any Angle by Steve Worthington, teaches everything you need to know about drawing heads. He talks about how to draw standard heads in different angles using techniques he mastered in his animation career. Skillshare is the largest online learning community that houses a variety of classes on topics like entrepreneurship, design, video editing, and of course every topic you can imagine about drawing. If you're like me, you learn by doing. On Skillshare, you can submit projects upon completing a class and get feedback from your peers. In my opinion, this learning and practicing combo is what's going to help you improve the most. This year, I personally want to improve my skills as an artist and content creator as much as possible. One of the ways to achieve that is to constantly learn and absorb new information. Not only are the classes on Skillshare taught by world-class creatives, they're also structured for you to maximize your learning experience. If that's still not enough to convince you, the first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Thank you Skillshare for sponsoring the video. And when it comes to layering, this is probably the part that gives most of us the headaches, because when you look at the pro stuff, it looks super intimidating, right? There are so many strands going here and there. Like, my brain is hurting just imagining how many layers I need to manage to get this. But if you have done the first part well, grouping the hair into big chunks, the layering should be a piece of cake, in theory. A bonus tip for practicing the grouping itself would be looking at figurines. They usually do a good job in simplifying chunks of hair into big 3D shapes, so it's very useful to study from them to understand how to group hair better. Also for lighting, but we'll touch on that very soon. No more individual strands like what you're seeing here. But I guess for this, there are two things you want to pay attention to. One is which groups of hair are on top and which groups are beneath. And the lesser groups you have, the better you'll be able to manage them. You really want to pick your battles here. For example, the most complicated overlay parts here are at the front portion of the hair. These side parts and the back are actually pretty simple. And here, lots of details are being grouped here at the front, and these are just silhouettes. The second thing you want to pay attention to is where the groups of hair are attached to the head. This is probably the most overlooked thing because, you know, sometimes we just mindlessly draw hair and, oh, I want to add some strands for that juicy detail. And then you get these random strands that just magically appeared out of thin air. In this reference, this part is relatively simple, just a half moon shape for the straight bangs, and then you get the twin tails, which looks a lot more complicated. So the way I would simplify it is to first identify where the groups are attached to. I see a main group here curving down and another one doing this S motion, and on the left side it's just a circular shape like this. Then when you add in little breaks and stuff to make it look more complicated, remember, you want to follow the big, medium, small rule when you're doing so. Same thing here with this reference, I just pay attention to how the front bangs are curving and grouping, and they mostly look like this to me, and the squish of the bun here for that nice touch of physics. It's also very useful to do these X-ray drawings if you're just starting out and you can't exactly visualize the position of these knots yet. What can I say? Layers are OP, man. They're incredibly useful, and once these get intuitive enough for you, you can slowly get rid of these training wheels. Now we proceed with the other half of the equation, lighting, which might look super scary because of all the layering you have done in your sketch phase, but unless you're doing some super obscure lighting scheme where the light comes from the bottom or behind or whatever, the shadow placements are usually pretty intuitive. In most cases, the light will be from the top. The shadows always cast around the face because it's how hair works. It's like an umbrella that covers around the head, so all the shadows you see will be around this area. I don't know if that made any sense, but if you have done your sketch properly and have your layers set up, it should be pretty intuitive at this point. All we have to do is to make it look pretty. There are two types of shadows being used here. The first type should be automatic if you set up the layers of hair in step 2, so every time there's an overlap, there will be a shadow here when it's facing away from the light. This is also a great technique to create more interest around an area because there's more contrast around these places with cast shadows. The other type is the more general lighting of the overall head form going like this. This divides the form into big chunks of light and shadow, and as you can see in Ccroquette's pieces, the lighting always comes from the side, creating this super contrasty lighting from one side to the other side of the head. Once you got those two things figured out, the rest is just making things look extra fancy with extra light sources. And the most common one to use is the skylight, which are these blues you see here. And then there's also subsurface scattering on where the strong light source is coming in. For these, I generally see diamond shapes being used to represent the texture of the hair here. In Ccroquette's case, it's a diamond shape with a gradient and slightly blurred edges instead of these ones with a more jagged edge. It gives the hair a smoother and softer look. Because this is a secondary light source, it's important to go super desaturated and low contrast here because you want to keep the main attention here from the main light source. The values here shouldn't be too different since they technically lies in the shadow region. It's also really nice to add a glow effect with an airbrush and either overlay or soft light layer here on that strong light area like what Ccroquette is doing. And this will help sell that subsurface scattering effect more as well. I also see a gradient going from light to dark whenever there's a strong directional light like this. This can be easily done with a mask on top of the entire hair here to apply a gradient for that subtle transition. Back to the figurines. Since a lot of the hair are grouped into big chunky shapes, it makes them really nice to study from for lighting as well. And after this, it's just a matter of adding these little strands in. tastefully. These breaks the flow of the hair and adds that final layer of detail to complete the whole look of the hair. But obviously you want to keep them in control at all times and only add them when it makes sense. For scenes like this where there's no wind or no movement of the hair, it's actually weird if you add too many of the strands in. It just makes the character looks messy in my opinion. If you made it this far, you probably gain a little more understanding about how to draw hair, but if you don't really understand how to draw the face well, then all of this won't really do anything for your art. That's why you want to watch this video where I studied 10 pro artists to find out how to draw faces. Subscribe please. Bye!